This time we're doing things a tiny bit different here at Coffee with April. What we're gonna do is, I have a few questions here on the phone, and I promise to do a bit of a Q&A here. So we're gonna pick one of the questions here, and it's a pretty big question, so I reckon it will take a bit of time to answer. It's from a guy in Germany called Max Ram. He writes, and I'm quoting this so that we all understand what I'm actually answering. I would like to hear your take on power distribution in buyer, seller, producer relationships. Which typical habits are necessary and what can be considered unfair or abuse? Well, that's a pretty heavy question to begin with. I think there's a lot of different takes. There's a lot of different approaches on it. All I can do is kind of share my own, or what we do here at April. We're actually going through some significant changes in terms of how we're trading our green coffee, which is very much based on us actually reflecting on these questions. For those of you that don't have an insight in the kind of trading model of green coffee, I'm sure there's a million different versions of it, but to simplify for this question, let's talk about just two of them so you have an understanding just originally what we're talking about. So, especially coffee, we often talk about direct trade. Direct trade means different things for different people, but let's say we really want to simplify it. It's basically, I would argue, a roaster buying from a farmer that is able to export his own coffee, right? Or her own coffee. So a farmer that actually has export rights, which is not always the case. In some countries, you are not even allowed to. You actually have to have someone else exporting the coffee. Then I guess, for example, direct trade could actually be you buying from a farmer that has a good connection with an exporter, and so on, right? But basically you paying directly to the farmer, right? The second thing, which is within specialty coffee is a very common thing today, is that you buy from an importer. So really famous, very good importers would be Nordic Approach, Collaborative Coffee Source, 3-2 Cup, Falcon, Belco. You have a long list of different ones. Basically, how they're trading then is that they're trading, again here, either they trade directly from a farmer, if the farmer can export its own coffee, or they're trading from an exporter, right? So I think here is where it gets a bit complicated, but let's identify those kind of two different main models that we're looking at. So direct trade, which is basically you buying directly from a farmer without any middlemen, or you buying from an importer, right? So part of the challenge here, I think, when we're looking at buying from an importer is transparency, in the sense that, okay, you have a list price of a coffee from an importer. That importer is telling you that this coffee costs 11 euros a kilo, for example. And the question here then is, so how much money has the farmer actually gotten in the end? Now, there's no confirmative answers to that, and there's different equations depending on country and farmer and so on, right? But the interesting thing here is that in some of those cases, what's happening is that the farmer on their side have already sold the coffee to an exporter. So for example, where some of these major importers are going to, let's say, Colombia, Ethiopia, Kenya, and so on, and deciding to buy coffees, then normally the discussions are not necessarily individually with the farmer, the discussion is with an exporter. So you come to an exporter office and you try this range of coffees that the exporter has shown to you. And the interesting thing for me as a roaster is how much transparency we have in what the exporter actually negotiated with the farmer before the exporter negotiated with the importer, right? So that's the kind of interesting thing here. The question is kind of referencing, so what should you ideally think about to be able to treat everyone fairly, versus what shouldn't you do in that sense? And I think I just want to give you an example, because it's very easy to talk about these kind of things, which it's unfortunately easier to talk about them and say that you're doing the right things than actually doing the right things. So I'm just going to give you an example, which is something very current here at April. We can give you two examples. So the first one is the coffee that I'm actually drinking at the moment, which is our new yellow Icatu from Fazenda Esperança and farmer Bruno in Brazil. That's a great example of a direct trade coffee. So Bruno is exporting his own coffee. He has a European office in Amsterdam where he's distributing basically from the Netherlands to the rest of the world, right? But he is doing the whole process by himself. So I talk with him, I negotiate prices directly with him, and basically pay him whatever he tells me to pay, right? And it's an amazing coffee, so I'm happy to do that. Secondly, let's take what we're doing at Volcan Azul with Alejo Castro, which is our partner farm in Costa Rica, which is a slightly different model, but we're working with the same values. So that is me or us going to the farm, visiting him, he telling us, okay, so we have these coffees available. I want this amount of money for these coffees. And we say, yes, we're gonna pay whatever you want us to pay. Then what we do in this case, because we're buying quite of a large volume from the Volcan Azul farm, and we're a tiny company, and if we're a tiny company, it's hard to just give him cash up front. So what we're doing then is that we negotiate all of the prices directly with Alejo at Volcan Azul, and after that, we connect with a logistical partner in Europe that will help us import the coffee, that will pay Alejo directly at shipping, and that we later on can pay as we get the coffee, right? So we can buy per delivery rather than giving all the money directly with Alejo. So we have a situation here where we negotiate the exact prices we want to pay for a certain coffee, and we tell this logistical partner that you are to pay him this amount of money. Then obviously that logistical partner is going to charge us a fee on top of that, right? So we're ending up paying more money for the coffee than, for example, what we're doing with this yellow Icatu from Fazenda Esperança, because we have a logistical partner in between. But that logistical partner is someone that we have chosen, and therefore allows us full transparency. So we know the exact cost that comes with this coffee, which I think is a really interesting, for us, super sustainable way to trade coffee, because it will keep our cash flow clean, and it will give us the ability together with Alejo to decide whatever price we want to do. And we have full transparency all the way down. And I think that's really the most important part. That being said, I'm not going to say that it's wrong to buy directly from lists from importers, for example. It's something we have done in the past, and this how we started with April. Something we're moving away from, but definitely something we have done. And some of these guys are absolutely amazing. I think the most important thing that you can do if you want to buy these list copies, for example, is that you need to have you need to see an honest calculation on, okay, so what is the cost breakdown here, right? So an importer says the farmers gets, let's say €4 a kilo. Then the question here, well, was that actually the farmer or was that the exporter? And if that was the exporter, how much actually goes to the farmer, right? So you want to understand the cost structure here from a farm level. And sometimes buying list coffee, so to speak, that becomes a bit difficult because it's also about understanding the financial structure in that country. So another interesting example, and we're straying a bit off topic here, but I think it's relevant. We have a major importer basically backing out from Costa Rica now, deciding not to buy, which if at least my interpretation of the reason they gave was that the production cost is too high for the quality that comes out of the country, and they basically have an issue selling the coffee. So they refused to buy from it. And me personally, I get really excited when I find a country like Costa Rica where the production cost is super high, because that means people are actually getting paid, right? So there's a more financial sustainable situation in that producing country than in a lot of other places, right? So I think that's pretty amazing. And the only way for me to understand that and see that is to go to Costa Rica and see what's going on, talk with the farmers, in our case, Volcan Azul, and actually look at the cost structure. And then you can make up your own mind on top of that, right? But I think, again, the most important thing is that you understand who gets what in this whole equation. I mean, to be fair, within the specialty coffee, at least within my experience, I've been in specialty coffee for 7 years now. Not always trading coffee, but from a kind of buying perspective, the last years now, it's very little abuse that I see in specialty coffee. Most of it is actually very fair. I think the abuse that is coming from roasters going down to farmers asking them to lower the price. Or the abuse that is coming is roasters going down to farmers saying, let's try all of these funky processing experiments, and then I don't want to pay for it in the end because it doesn't taste the way that I want to, right? So I can't emphasize enough the importance of consistency when trading for good and bad, and sticking with your partners. And I think that's really the only sustainable way to do things. A big part of what we always done here at April, when we try to do it with the farmers, we try to do it with the rest of our suppliers, with our partners and customers as well. And it's about growing together with people, right? So it's about identifying, so who do I want to work with and why, and then stick with these guys, right? For whatever reason, right? And in good or bad, and improve together, right? So, I mean, there's a few basic things that are really important, and it's just making sure from a trading perspective that the farmer gets the money the farmer wants to have, right? And realize that depending on country, depending on region, depending on family situation, depending on production cost, that price tag can be very, very different, which is totally fine as well. But in the end of the day, at April, we're making sure that the farmers that we buy from get the price that they are asking for. And we know that they're asking for it because they can communicate that price to us directly. Then if we work with a logistical partner or not doesn't really matter, because it's them telling us we want this amount of money for this coffee, and we're looking at the quality, we're looking at the production, we're looking at what they've been delivering over a long time, and then we're making an assessment deciding, so is this worth it or not? And if we say that this is worth it, then we push play and we go for it, right? And we stick with these guys. And I think that's really important to do in the future as well. So again, I mean, the tricky thing I find with value change and why the value chain and why we're moving away from trading from importers, at least the list coffees from an importer, is simply that I want to see more transparency down to the farmer. That being said, it's not that you can't do that with an importer. Just ask your importer. In the end of the day, all the informations are there because someone has traded this coffee, right? The importer has bought this coffee. So the importer knows where the cost structure is. Now, if the importer wants to share these details with you, then I say stick with this importer and go for it, because that's probably a really good long-term solution. Another challenge that I find with trading with importers, or again list coffees, is the fact that I'm not in control over what will happen with this coffee. So part of the issue is from a farm perspective, and even if you go down to a farm and you have this really idealistic approach where I want to buy all of your production always, they have this new really interesting varietal. And we buy everything this year, we buy everything the second year, but then further it gets really interesting, because I'm going to bet you that the growth of a production from a specific varietal in 90% of the cases grows faster than your company. So your ability to keep on buying that exclusively becomes more difficult. And then if you end up on a list, then it's still going to be based on, okay, so it's a high volume coffee, you have all of these other buyers. You have trends, you have prices, all of this, right? And then the question is, are you going to be able to buy that coffee continuously? So for us at April, it's important to set up a structure where we know that we can access the coffees we want to access long term. We know the farmer gets paid what the farmer has asked us to do. We've seen how that farmer is producing coffee. We see how they work with. We're about to launch, which will happen. Maybe we would have a version of this when this video is out. We will have this questionnaire or Q&A session with each farmer we're working with now, where we get very detailed answers on really interesting things around the farm. That's also one of the things that we're kind of fed up with here at April, where you buy these list coffees and you go on, Cropster Hub or whatever people are trading from, or any kind of importers list, and you look at these different websites from other roasters and you see their description of the coffee, and it's all basically a copy paste from the original source. And we're kind of fed up with that. We want to have more personality in it. We want to have more detailed, more specific information, and we want to showcase the partners we work with, and the reason why we work the reason why we're working with them, because that's not a random decision, right? There's a concept behind it. There's a reason why we're working with someone specifically. So I think that's about it. I mean, I'm gonna have a look again at this question to see if I actually answered it correctly. Let you hear your take on power distribution in buyer-seller producer relationship with typically habits are necessary and what can be considered unfair abuse. Yeah, so I mean, I think we pretty much covered everything. I mean, unfair or abuse is you're not paying what the farmer wants you to pay. You're not understanding the cost structure and transparency of the value chain. So if you buy a list coffee, understand the cost that comes, not just the total price that you're paying. Realize that the farmer is probably getting a very low percentage of what you're actually paying on that list coffee, which again, I'm not questioning the cost structure. I'm just saying know what the farmer gets and know if the farmer is okay with this. That's it. Power distribution and buyer seller. I mean, it's pretty easy. The people with money has the most power. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I mean, farmers is I mean, this is business whether we want to or not. Meaning that if I have some really capital strong buyer from anywhere in the world that goes after the same coffee that I am, they're gonna get the coffee. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because I want the farmers to be able to, I mean, the more the farmer can charge, the better, whether that is funky fermentation coffees or whatever it is. I mean, if the farmer found a way to sell their coffee more expensive and make a bigger profit, that's a good thing, because we want them to make more money, right? However, we tend to work with producers that are, I mean, we are all interested in money, let's be fair, but we're also, I hope, interested in quality, right? So we want to work with farmers that share our interest for quality, right? So a lot of the producers we work with are selling to us regardless if someone, for example, can offer a higher price, because they know we buy continuously, they like what we do with their coffee, and they like the brand that we represent. So there's a few different parts to it, but again, I mean, in terms of power distribution, the person with the money today is in the strongest position. Let's see in the future, because there will be a lack of specialty coffee in the future, most likely due to environment changes, due to increase in demand, and so on and so on. So we might actually get to a point where an exporter will definitely be in a kind of power situation, but that'll be a later video for a later time. What can be considered unfair or abuse? I mean, I think we pretty much touched on that. So, I mean, if you guys have any comments on this, thoughts, just write them down here. This is, I mean, in the end, this is the kind of core or foundation of specialty coffees. This is a really interesting question to discuss more about as well. So, any comments, write down here. Thank you, Max, for coming in with a question. We're gonna continue to do more of these as well. Thank you for tuning in. If you think it's interesting, please share. Thank you.